Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the September 2021 Community IT Innovators webinar. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the how-tos and whys of nonprofit IT staff training. Today, we're going to discuss the business needs for IT training, some examples of training done well, various training methods and resources you can use to develop a training program for your organization, and some tips and tricks that will help you get started with training at your nonprofit. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. Let me advance to the introduction slide. I'm the CEO of Community IT and the moderator for this webinar series. I'll also be a co-presenter for today's discussion on training. The slides and recording for today's webinar will be available on our website and YouTube channel later this week. If you're watching on YouTube right now, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel to receive automatic updates when we post new webinar recordings. Please use the Q&A panel throughout the webinar today, and we'll do our best to respond. We really want these webinar sessions to be interactive. Now, before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our company. Community IT is a 100% employee-owned company. Our team of 38 staff is dedicated to helping nonprofit organizations advance their missions through the effective use of technology. We're technology experts, and we've been consistently named a top 501 managed services provider by Channel Futures. And it's an honor that we received again in 2021. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's co-presenter, David Deal. David Deal is the founder and original owner of Community IT before selling the company to the employees. He's the current chair of the Community IT board. And at least, I don't know if anybody else, if Dave realizes this, but I consider him to be the lifetime CEO Emeritus of Community IT. David Deal
Johan, I'll just say that's another word, I think, for CEO 1.0, and I highly recommend the 2.0 upgrade.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. David Deal is also a founding partner of Build Consulting, an information strategy firm that works with nonprofit organizations. So welcome, David. It's hard to believe that in the 20 plus years that we've known each other, I think amazingly, this is the first time that we've actually co-presented a webinar together.
That's kind of crazy. Somehow you've avoided it or I've avoided it all of these years, but here we are. The stars have aligned, I suppose.
We couldn't avoid it any longer. So Dave, could you tell us a little bit more about Build Consulting and your role at Build?
Sure thing. As one of the founding partners at Build, there were 4 of us who had careers in the nonprofit technology space. And we really wanted to work with nonprofits on technology strategy specifically. So Build is heavily invested in the nonprofit space. We exclusively work with nonprofits, generally mid-sized and large nonprofits across the US and Canada. Our engagements are strategic. We help our clients make strategic technology decisions, from comprehensive technology roadmaps to software selections of systems like CRM, ERP, digital engagement, program management, grant management, and more. And our approach is really a collaborative approach. It's not about us choosing technology for you. It's about empowering you to make good technology decisions and to effectively do the things that support good adoption, strong adoption of the technology tools that you choose.
Great, thank you for that introduction. And I think that's a good lead into today's topic. Adopting technology tools is an essential part to implementing technology to IT itself. And training plays an important role in technology adoption. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to spend some time talking about different methods. There's no one size fits all or single approach to training. So we want to talk about some of the different methods that can be used for training and where different methods are appropriate. And finally, some training resources that we've found helpful and that we think you'll find helpful as you think about a training program at your own organization. So let's switch gears here a little bit and talk about the approach to business system training. So this one, and this again goes back to that point that you made about needing to focus on process and program and being deliberate about training. So what are the steps that you would recommend organizations go through to do that for business systems?
So first and foremost, I think this will go much better when organizations and teams have thought in advance about how do we want this process to work? What is it that we want people to do? And the clearer an organization or a department lead, team lead is about that, the easier everything else is after that. So for example, if you're implementing a CRM and you want to start to use it to track activities, how you're interacting with your constituents, well, one of the big questions that's going to come up is which of those activities are we going to track in the CRM? Absolutely everything, only meaningful emails and calls and meetings. And clarifying things like that in advance of a training are really important before showing people, taking the time to try to show people, here's how you record activities. It ensures that you're going to get quality, consistent data in to this system that you're implementing. So I really suggest start first with the process, clarifying it with SOPs, workflows, expectations for how it's going to work. I think one of the other things I'll say about this is not just something for the IT team or the business systems team to do. It really is a shared responsibility, in my opinion, of the business systems team and the business units to ensure that new staff are trained on processes. I think IT and the business systems teams, they're really best situated to develop and deliver the more general training. Here's your introduction to this software and the breadth of things we do with it and how to do certain generic activities in the software. But really, the team members, the business unit team members, are the experts in their processes and how the tool is being used to support their process. So I think you really have to go to those subject matter experts in the processes to develop and deliver process specific training. So it's really a shared responsibility of IT and business systems with the business units. I think each organization has to get clear on who's going to do what. And then I think HR is the team that should typically be responsible for making sure that that's happening in the right way, making sure that as people come on board, introducing them to the IT and business systems team for their general orientation is important, and then making sure that the subject matter experts know when to lead with what they're doing. I think just the last thing I'll say about business systems training, really, if you think about it, the training, probably what comes to mind for most people is, hey, we're going through this implementation and we need to train people before it goes live. Yes, and that should happen really close to go live so that people can use what they're learning right away. I think that's an important point I'll talk about a little more later. But if you think about it, usually there's a design stage and a configuration and a testing stage where you're working with a smaller group of staff. And that's really an opportunity because that smaller group of staff usually need to be trained on the system before they're doing the user acceptance training, as it's called. Before they do the testing on the system, usually there's some training involved in that. And that's really an opportunity to work on your training content, your training delivery in preparation for the larger staff training just prior to go live. So that's how we approach it at Build. And Johan, any additional thoughts here?
I just wanted to say I love that suggestion because you're really incorporating training throughout the process of implementation. And I think sometimes, I think too often really, when we think about training, we think about that thing at the end, that necessary evil that comes at the very end or close to the very end of the process. And I think, your suggestion of Let's put the training together for the people who are implementing, for the people who are involved in the migration process, for acceptance testing. Let's have training at every stage along the way. Then by kind of weaving it into the overall project at every level and at every phase, it's probably going to lead to a more effective and successful training program at the final stages of implementation.
And a better return on that big investment of new software.
Yeah. So what it means is you have to have a training mindset from the very beginning, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I don't know if you're ready to transition to the next slide, but one of the
Sure.
tools
Okay.
that we find helpful at Build Consulting for doing this is a stakeholder impact grid. And at its simplest, what this is something that cross-references the teams in your organization or the groups. I think of those as the rows of the spreadsheet. And it cross-references that with the processes that are changing, and the processes are the columns. And so you match up the groups, the rows and the columns, the groups and the processes to identify who's going to be impacted by changes in each of these processes when we implement new software. That's fundamentally what it's about. So you can plan that training, to your point, Johan, so you can know in advance, here are the different groups we have to meet, we have to provide training for as each of these processes go live. Um, the other thing that you can do is you can extend that. There's a tool that we have on the buildconsulting.com website. It's a change management impact template that builds on the stakeholder impact grid. And this really helps you to think through the resources and methods that are appropriate for each group. Was it high impact, medium impact, low impact on that group? Do they need in-person or asynchronous training? What job aids do they need? What communication should we be thinking about? What sort of leadership alignment considerations are there around this as well? So those are a couple of resources that are free for download: the stakeholder impact grid and the change management impact template that at Build we find helpful for planning out trainings related to business systems change.
That's great. I mean, those are great resources, and I think that's a great way to think about training and a great way to think about who needs training. And again, to like approach it from that standpoint of a process. Like training is it's not an event. It's an ongoing process in the life of the organization. So we've talked a lot about how training can be successful and ways of thinking about training. Let's turn our attention to the types of training. What are some of the different methods? We sort of alluded to this earlier, but keeping in mind that the training is not just the method. There's all the planning and the process design that has to go in first. But once you've done that, then you're in a much better position to sort of identify which training methods are going to work well for which stakeholders and for which business processes. So I'm sure you've experienced a fair amount of vendor training in your time. What is vendor training useful? I mean, I guess, should vendors offer training? They often tout the training that they include with their software. How far should we go with what vendors are promising?
So I will definitely endorse it as useful, and I will also say that it is definitely not the full picture, right? And what we're talking about here is when there's pre-recorded content. Sometimes it's live webinars, sometimes it's classroom training, and companies like Microsoft, Blackbaud, Salesforce, they do a great job providing a wealth of training materials, and third-party training providers as well. And these can work well for kind of general digital literacy. There are lots of resources that are readily available, and none of us should reinvent the wheel when it comes to these things. How we'll often use this at Build with our clients is it's used as an introduction to software. And there are some types of software where this can get you 90% of the way there. If you want to learn about Word or Excel or Google Sheets or Google Docs or something like that, or Teams or Slack, then this training can get you 80, 90% of the way there. When it comes to implementations like CRM that are maybe a little bit more unique to each organization, some of the vendors will offer trainings that help you learn a CRM, but that training takes you much less of the way to where you need to be after the trainings. The training really skews toward here's what our software can do, and even when it's provided by someone who's helping you to implement that software, often that's still the case. They're looking at it through the lens of this is a technology tool that can do A, B, and C. And so I really think that's useful, and you need to follow it up with trainings that are really customized to your organization and how your organization is using it.
So let's talk about the customized trainings and when that's appropriate and when it's worth putting the time in to develop that.
So I think this sort of user-generated training content is what I would call it, and I would say this is needed for the more specific business systems training. Here's how we're going to use this system to do X at our organization, and this is really delivered best by a staff member or a consultant who has worked with your organization on the business process. So Build provides this type of training sometimes for like CRM implementations, for example. But whether it's a staff member or a consultant, someone who has been involved in how do we use this tool to support this process. Um, and if you have someone on staff who is great at that, I'm working with a client right now where that's the case. Um, People who are trained in professional development and trainings and things like that. So they have some great resources to rely on at a school that I'm working with. And if you have a staff member who can do this sort of thing, or many staff members, since it's going to be specific to different processes, then that's fantastic. And again, I'll just highlight it requires clarity from the organization, the department, on how the group of users are going to be using that system. That's an important piece to clarify first. It's not something that can just be handed off to the trainers. It's something that leadership needs to think about in advance of the training.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So it really is a collaborative effort on a number of levels, right? It's not just something to be delegated without thought.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great, maybe one of the key words, a word for the day, of this presentation is collaborate. And I think, earlier when you were talking about training, not just being a responsibility of IT or business systems departments, but being also a collaborative responsibility with a specific program area or another business unit. That the thing that came to mind for me was breaking down the silos. Oftentimes we often hear about the silos that exist within an organization, and for training to be effective, it really requires a collective effort. Everybody has to feel involved and invested in it. And I think that if you do that work in advance, then maybe it helps to alleviate. I've certainly given trainings where the mood in the room is I'm being forced to come to this training that IT is doing. And most people, for better or for worse, like IT is the department you want them to be behind the scenes getting the job done. And so kind of creating goodwill and a sense of collaboration ahead of time also makes the training event, I think, more successful just from a buy-in perspective.
Great points.
So in terms of you can do a show and tell training. That's kind of the classic. You go to a classroom, you're watching something. Nowadays, I guess you're watching a video. Are there times where show and tell is useful? What are some of the limitations of show and tell training?
Yeah, and I think in looking at our time, I'll kind of skim through this quickly, but I think it's really just helpful as an introduction to something that's new, as a precursor to hands-on training. Because the challenge, show and tell is great for covering a lot of material quickly, especially for a group of people who may be at very different levels in their understanding of something. But it's really hard to retain unless you apply what you're learning. What's the rule of thumb? People take away about 5 minutes of content from a 1 hour training. So yeah, we hope you get 5 minutes of good content from today's webinar. But really, you remember it if you use it. And so I think the hands-on training is really key for anything after that initial introduction.
I will say we've now started to release these webinars as podcasts. So if you want to listen to them while you're developing the training program, that might be effective. So it sounds like hands-on is a better. I think it's important to note, as you said, there are times in which show and tell is effective and can be used effectively, but it sounds like it needs to be used, in concert with a hands-on training approach.
Indeed, use it or lose it, basically. I had a Power BI training 6 months ago, and I wish I had opportunities to be hands-on with it since then, and I haven't. So, I wouldn't be starting from where I was before. I'd be a little bit advanced to that, but I haven't used it enough since then to really fully benefit from that training. So use it or lose it. I think it really is. It's easier today with more staff having laptops to just have have a group show up in a room and then lead the training there. You don't have to worry so much about the logistics. How do we do a hands-on training? And that allows you to really tailor it to groups at different levels. Not everyone needs the same training. And so you can really think about how to break teams down into groups that are going to move at a similar pace. Because the challenge with hands-on training is how do you keep people moving at the same pace when they're all
Mm.
trying to do this stuff that we're showing them how to do.
Yeah, and it's more time consuming, more expensive. It requires more investment up front. It requires a work environment to work to do the hands-on work in. So there's definitely more involved. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about specific resources that organizations can use to put into place this training program. If you're incorporating training thinking into your implementation process, if you've put together your stakeholder impact grid and your change management impact template, you understand who's being affected, you've designed a effective training program and process with an appropriate mix of vendor training and customized training, of show and tell training and hands-on training. You've got all of this in place. What are some of the tools that you can use to actually deliver this training that you've done such a great job designing?
So here's just a few ideas. Number one, videos are becoming more and more common. Especially short videos can be really helpful. We'll use it for 30-second to 1 minute kind of how-to snippets. Or the other time that we're using video is just like recording a Zoom or a Teams training session that's an hour that someone can attend. And the advantage is it's more descriptive. It's richer content. The cons, it's not as easily searchable. It's not easily editable. So if something changes about what you recorded, you essentially you could edit a part of the video, but more likely you're going to end up re-recording that video. So how-to documents certainly have their place. They're easier to produce than videos, I would say. They're searchable, they're editable. The cons, it's not quite as easy to read something on a page and follow it in the same way you would if you're watching it on a video. And then, finally, I think there's software that kind of is available within the software that you're using. Salesforce is one that I'm familiar with. There's a software called WalkMe that was used that can be used with Salesforce to provide sort of just-in-time training, if you will, in digestible bits as you're using the system. And we had, one client, for example, who used it to support onboarding of a large number of light users, volunteers, chapter staff, into using a Salesforce application. This was 10,000 users, and not all of those could be reached with training at a particular time, a scheduled training session. So WalkMe became an aid for those volunteer users, for chapter-based staff, to really help them learn how to do things like volunteer onboarding into the system, scheduling mentoring, guiding event managers on how to manage group events. And then there was a set of knowledge base articles. In this case, it was in Zendesk And these KB articles and WalkMe really referred to each other to kind of make that a really rich, uh, you know, a rich set of training content for people who would learn in different ways. Um, so that was really helpful. Another thing that I found helpful is Screencast-O-Matic, and there are plenty of tools out here. This I'm not saying this one is any better than the others, but it's one that I appreciate because I record short videos, it hosts them for me, and then I can take the links from that and really, embed those links in other places to get to those videos. So that's some of the stuff that I've found useful. Johan, any thoughts or things to add to that?
No, I think those sound like great resources. I think the lifespan of a training resource is something you definitely want to think about as you're putting it together. We have a pretty massive online documentation repository that we use for managing, our clients' IT systems, and it's all text-based. They're basically just extensive how-to documents, and that works a lot better for us than a video would because it's changing. All of these networks are sort of living entities, or at least dynamic, and you need to be able to change those how-tos on a pretty regular basis. So thinking about sort of the long-term, the lifespan of the resource, of the content, I think is really important.
And I think you're about to share about one of the best resources of all.
Yes, your peers.
Yes.
Peers are an incredible resource, and I think we really try to encourage. We're obviously happy to answer questions around IT, but it's far more effective to have someone in the organization who knows how to use various IT solutions as sort of a first line of defense for a couple reasons. One, they're going to be a lot more available than an external party is. Two, they understand the culture of the organization. So in general, staff are going to feel more comfortable coming to somebody they know to get answers to questions. And three, they're familiar with the work that the organization is doing. So they just have, a better context for the tasks, the activities that someone is trying to do. So having subject matter experts, someone who's sort of seen as an expert on a particular system or in a particular area, is really vital. I think we've seen over and over again that organizations who have a subject matter expert for their technology solution, universally, the whole organization uses that solution more effectively than in cases where the organization doesn't have someone who they're maybe not the owner. If it's a database, they're not necessarily the person who's responsible for keeping it clean or paying the bills or working out licensing, but there's someone who really understands how to use the system effectively, and they're sort of acknowledged and seen, as an expert in the use of the system. So those are really effective. And then also having a formal mentor program can be helpful, especially for newer staff who are coming into the organization. A lot of this discussion that we've had about training applies to new systems that are being rolled out to existing staff. But you also want to think about taking all of these resources and this approach and think about how you're going to make it available to new staff. You're not just training the 5 staff that you have right now, you're training that new staff person. You're developing a training system for that new staff person who's going to join the organization a year from now. So mentoring programs, just sort of formally saying this is your mentor, even for a short period of time, can be very effective. As can organizing the resources that you have.
Yeah, I think if you're an organization that really doesn't have a training program and you're just starting to gather things, like the first level of maturity around a training program might just be getting together a list of links to videos, to helpful resources and descriptions of those, and putting them in one place so it's easier for staff to find. And we've used things like an intranet or a wiki before for things like this, especially if a lot of the content is written content. Then a wiki can be really useful for that. It's easily searchable. Or if you just have a list of links and descriptions of what's in the videos that those links are pointing to, that can be really helpful as well. Um, Sometimes these lists can be managed in the software. In Salesforce, for example, just having a page of links built into Salesforce that links to some of the videos has been a um, kind of a low cost way to go about something like that. And the advantages to this: it's easy to create, it's easy to update, it's easy to access. You can get more sophisticated as you go to greater levels of maturity around your program. There are LMSs where here we call them pre-built, and what we mean by that is just LMSs where the content is provided, like LinkedIn Learning, where you're just picking and choosing different classes, courses per group, per person. And then there's a customized LMS where really you're getting a learning management system platform, and it enables you to produce your own content to embed into that platform. And some common tools for this: Cornerstone has been one of the market leaders. I'm working with a client right now that's using My Trailhead, not to be confused with Trailhead, which is what Salesforce uses to or provides as a training resource for Trailhead. But My Trailhead is a platform that organizations can use for their custom training content. There's software like Moodle, which is open source. And then also, I would point out, if you have an HR information system, a lot of HRIS systems come with an LMS. And I would encourage you to look at that. You may already have an LMS in house that you didn't know about. The advantages to an LMS, a learning management system: you can give assignments, you can track completion of those assignments. Oftentimes, they'll have content creation tools. The downside is at that point, you're looking at an ongoing investment, a greater investment in the cost of these tools. So, really, whether it's right for you depends on the maturity of your training program and your commitment to it. Are you going to follow through on helping to make sure that the right people are taking the right trainings?
One other method of organizing resources, which I hadn't thought of, but one of the attendees just chatted in, and it's a great suggestion. For peer-based training in larger organizations, maintaining employee profiles that showcase employee proficiencies, expertise, that can also be really helpful. Having those employee profiles can give new employees, an idea of where to go if they're looking for peer-based training. So.
And I'll just add that HRIS software can be helpful with that in terms of providing a structure to kind of plug some of that proficiencies and expertise into and provide a ready-made system to do that. It certainly doesn't require a system like that, but can benefit from it.
Yeah, great. So we had a slide for Q&A, but you have to keep in mind, this is our first webinar after over 20 years of working together. So it's amazing we actually finished it within the hour. But
I don't know how we held it all in this long, Johan.
I know.
Yeah, great to be able to share.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much, David, for joining us today. I did want to mention that anyone who's interested can continue the conversation with Build Consulting. You can go to their website. I'll just chat this out. You can tweet at them. Is that the proper term?
It sounds right to me.
Tweet to them, and you can reach out to them with this contact info. Also find them on LinkedIn. Just wanted to highlight, next month, October, Cybersecurity Month, we have a lot of fun things planned. We have a quiz, sort of a self-assessment quiz that you can take to check your cyber awareness. So keep an eye out. We're going to be posting that on our website. We're also going to have a cybersecurity focused webinar for our webinar in October. Our webinars are free, open to the nonprofit community. It's going to be Wednesday, October 20th at 3 o'clock. It's a little bit of a surprise. It's going to be related to Cybersecurity Month. So we encourage you to register and join us next month. And with that, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for your attention and your time. And thank you again, David, for sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be on with you, Johan.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.